Hey there, Lori.
Hi, Denise.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, this is take two. I feel like we do a lot of take twos.
Well, we're perfectionists.
We are.
And
That's what my therapist says.
if it didn't feel right, if it didn't bring us joy, then we toss it.
Yeah.
So it didn't bring
Marie
us
Kondo.
joy.
We Marie Kondoed our podcast.
We Marie Kondoed the shit out of our podcast.
Yeah. We have a great show today, Denise.
We always have a great show, Lori.
Yeah. So we went down to the Marine Science Center and talked to two climate scientists.
What scientists?
Climate scientists.
Oh, I didn't know what you said.
What did you think I said?
I don't know.
Do you listen to me?
Well, it's hard. But I have no choice.
I mean, we work together.
Right. We went to Nahant, Massachusetts, to the Northeastern, what's it called?
Northeastern University Marine Science Center.
I wanted to call it Oceanic.
Yeah,
they
do a lot of work with NOAA though.
Doo-doo.
They do. You were such a baby.
I know. I went to marine biology camp for a week.
You did.
In
And you
high
couldn't
school.
wait to tell Brian Helmuth.
Well, you told Brian Helmuth.
Because I knew you wanted him
And
to
he
know.
knew. He was at that place.
Yeah.
Long Island University, the Southampton campus. We bonded over that.
Yeah,
the
you
end.
did.
We did. Then we started holding hands and skipping.
Yeah, so we had a great chat with them. And then we are going to chat a little bit about the headlines.
Yep.
And before the
Some
interview.
unfortunate headlines, unfortunately.
And we have political posse, Denise.
Yes,
What's
we do.
What's on the agenda for today?
Trump continues to isolate the United States with immigration. So some things that he's closing that impacts the influx of people coming into the country.
What
And
a
it's not an
shocker.
influx, actually.
What a shocker.
Shocker. Anyway,
All right, so let's get to it, Denise.
let's do it.
Last week, a 28-year-old Australian native opened fire in two mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, killing 50 people.
Can I just interrupt you for a second? I
Yeah.
really wish that we didn't have to talk about this.
Yeah.
I'm so sick of all of these, like, senseless acts of violence, especially against Muslims and people of color and people of faith. Extremism is extremism. I don't care if it's the left or the right. Extremism is extremism, and it needs to kind of stop. But continue. Sorry.
It does need to stop. Not even just kind of.
It needs to stop.
It needs to stop, period. Full stop. The suspect, who we will not be naming in this podcast, appeared in court on Saturday flashing the white power sign while his hands were in shackles. Police are now combing through the suspect's manifesto, which is posted online on social media before the shooting. The manifesto praised white nationalist views and targeted Muslims and immigrants. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who's amazing, has vowed to tighten gun laws, and she has been quoted saying, "I can tell you one thing right now, our gun laws will change." The country's cabinet met on Monday to begin work on those gun control laws, which is the fastest response I think I've personally ever seen.
She
to a
said it was
tragedy like
72
this.
hours.
Yeah. So the massacres were streamed on social media, shared and reposted, which is another alarming aspect of this terrible story. According to Facebook, the company removed 1.5 million videos of the shooting in the first 24 hours.
1.5 million?
Yeah. And prevented 1.2 million videos from being uploaded.
Yeah, but I hear it still keep on popping up.
Yeah.
Especially through YouTube.
Yep. So there's a lot to cover here. But let's start with Jacinda Ardern's work in response to this tragedy. What do you see as the differences between how she responded and how we've seen other leaders respond to mass shootings like this?
Well, the most obvious, and I think everyone has said this already, it's like the thoughts and prayers. I mean,
Oh God, yeah.
This woman was
Thoughts and prayers is the most useless. Thoughts and prayers, not even just thoughts and prayers over Twitter.
Yeah. I think she was with the people. She was with them, mourning with them. She was wearing a full hijab with them, like respecting them and just
And consoling them
and comforting them. And there's a couple of things that I think that she did great. One, she said these gun laws are changing, and I believe her when she says it.
Yep.
When she spoke in front of Parliament, she talked about it was the Muslim blessing and welcome at the beginning and at the end, which I thought was really, really encompassing of that community.
Yep.
And saying, look, we're here for you. We're standing with you. The country is paying for the flights in and visas of any family members that want to come in and say goodbye to their family members and put them to rest.
Oh, wow.
She's paying for, repatriation in case any of those affected families want to leave New Zealand. New Zealand's going to pay for it. And she touted the mental health of anybody who wanted to call. And she gave a statistic when she spoke on the Parliament floor that they had received over 600 calls so far. And the average that they were lasting, 40 minutes.
Wow.
So, and then she, you know, praised the first responders and the people who, like, gave their lives trying to subdue this gunman. And I think overall, she just showed a lot of strength, a lot of leadership, and action. And I'm sorry, I would like her to be representing me.
Right. No, I agree. Her response was what it needed to be. She addressed the issues that needed to be talked about. And she's showing that she's taking action.
Yeah. It will be really interesting to see where they go with the gun laws.
So the gun laws, what they're looking at specifically is removing automatic rifles.
Right.
And making it stricter, making it harder to get automatic rifles in New Zealand. Because there's a stat that says 1 in 3 people in New Zealand have a firearm.
Right.
Which is a lot.
Yeah.
But she was like, there's no need to have automatic rifles. And there's been some pushback, but there's also not an organization like the NRA in New Zealand
that's influencing anything.
Right. So I'm sure it's easier to push. I'm sure it will be much easier to push through this law. And although there are some people, which I think there would always be, some people who are going to be against making stricter gun laws, everyone's pretty supportive of making the gun law stricter.
Yeah.
So, and she's fairly young too, Denise.
She is young.
Yeah. So she was elected in 2017 as part of this big progressive movement, including the election of like Macron in France and some other young leaders around the world. She was pregnant and on maternity leave while in office.
They were saying that she's the first one.
Yep.
She's the first one to have experienced that while in office. Congratulations.
Good for her.
That just shows you can do everything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you don't have to do
everything.
everything.
She brought her infant daughter on the UN floor last year.
Yeah.
While she was in the U.S.
I remember that.
She's the youngest prime minister and the third woman to hold the office. But what's also alarming is the rise. Like, we have to talk about the white nationalism angle of this, and how our administration, the Trump administration, is dismissing the fact that there is a problem with white nationalism, not just here in the U.S., but around the world.
Yeah, he was asked a point-blank question last week. Do you believe that white nationalism is on the rise? And he was like, no, I don't.
No. Yeah, he said, I don't really.
Yep.
I think it's a small group of people that have very, very serious problems, I guess. But
they're very fine people. Very fine people, these white nationalists. Are you kidding me? She point-blank stated that they have, like, it's there. She called it out. She identified it in her own country. She's like, whether or not we've seen it before, it doesn't matter. It's still there.
It exists.
It exists. And, you know, a lot of people have been pointing the finger over at Trump saying, like, you've exacerbated it with your inaction against white nationalism propaganda.
Right. You're basically enabling it.
Yeah. So by saying nothing.
Yeah. And the White House will contest that Trump had nothing to do with this. And,
well, he didn't directly.
He didn't coordinate anything.
No.
But the message he exudes to the public is a message of supporting white nationalism.
Yeah. And what do you think about the responsibility of Facebook and some of these social media things? She even said in her...
I think they're responsible.
I think some of it is a responsibility. She even alluded in her speech, like, saying you can't continue to make profit off of this.
Right.
You're the publisher of it. Whether or not you know...
with power comes responsibility.
Yeah, and they're not taking any responsibility.
Right. And there's been a lot of podcasts and news articles and even TV discussions around the responsibility of organizations like Facebook and YouTube. And one of the things that you'll hear very often is how a lot of people will talk about YouTube's algorithm, for example, and how you'll be led down a rabbit hole, which could help really encourage extremism, because the goal of the platform is to get you to stay on the site for as long as possible. Right. So how are they going to do that? They're going to keep finding videos that are related to the one you just watched to keep you on. And that is a great way to perpetuate and encourage extremism.
Yep.
Because you're exposing people to more and more videos that aren't even accurate or true.
Right.
They're spewing conspiracy theories, and there's no monitoring. So I know there's a fine line between the First Amendment.
Yeah.
And
It is
free speech and making sure that people are able to publish and talk about what they want without fears of repercussion. But I think that line disappears when it turns into hate and anger and perpetuates violence.
Well, when there's a violent act being captured and videoed and streamlined, that's where you kind of have to draw the line.
Right.
I mean, people, it is a fine line with the First Amendment, and people are going to write what they're going to write, and people can absorb it or dismiss it or do whatever. We have no control over that, right?
Right.
But there is some control that we can have when they're airing live violence and live people dying.
Right. Well, and when the argument is there's like millions of pieces of content that are being posted live on Facebook, for example, how are you going to monitor that? You got to figure it out.
And it makes me sad too, because these families are going through enough. They were in a safe place that they thought even the person who welcomed him, the shooter, into the mosque was like, welcome, brother. So
right.
these families are reliving this over and over again in their own minds, and then to know that it's possibly out there that their loved ones are on video being gunned down when they're in a state of peace, in a state of prayer.
Right.
And it's really disgusting. But I don't know. I don't want to talk about white supremacists when it's regard this anymore. It was great leadership, but those families are going through so much. And I think, I don't know.
I just want someone who's going to take action, call out this shit, and do something about it.
There's no bold leadership here in the United States.
I'll say this, Denise. The Anti-Defamation League said white supremacist propaganda efforts have increased 182% in the last year.
Yep.
Any other questions?
No. It needs to be called out. Enough already.
Yep. Something interesting happened in Quincy. So, the federal government is suing the city of Quincy for its alleged role in the mishandling of sewage and untreated wastewater. Prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office say the city violated the Clean Water Act by dumping sewage and wastewater into Boston Harbor and other bodies of water through storm drains and other sewers for nearly 10 years. According to the Boston Globe, the city was permitting pollutants that had E. coli bacteria and enterococcus. I don't know what it is, but it sounds
Well, then
gross.
don't say it.
It sounds like strep throat.
It's gross. Anything that says cock.
Onto Quincy beaches and tidal areas along the coastlines, such as Quincy Bay, Dorchester Bay, and Boston Harbor. And these samples were between 2009 and 2018. This is going on for a long time. The Quincy Mayor Thomas Koch was joined by Congressman Stephen Lynch at a press conference. And he expressed his disappointment and outrage by the federal government's move, stating that the city has been working with the administration on water cleanup efforts. Sorry. You've been dumping shit in the water for 10 years.
Well, according to Mayor Koch, he was saying that they've been working with the EPA and they've made strides through the past 10 years, and that they had talked about specifically this sewer pipe in Squantum or something that had a leak in it that was shown up in this report. And he's like, I don't know why it's in the report. It was fixed over a year ago. So I don't know what they're talking about. And it's like, well, if you're working closely. And then he said a couple of times, I'm surprised and disappointed. Surprised. Yeah. If you're working closely, how is this a surprise? So it means that you're not doing things quick enough for the EPA.
That's exactly what's happening too. And now the mayor's thinking of countersuing.
Yeah, countersuing. Go ahead. You know what was funny? Stephen Lynch just standing there, right?
Oh my God, that was my favorite part. So we're going to put a link. Let's put a link in the show notes about the press conference.
It was about 20 minutes, but it was pretty worth it.
I think the mayor at one point had said, we all had that rule when we were a kid. Once it rains, don't go swimming for a day.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's okay now?
Right. Stephen Lynch even said, too, he's like, the influx of all the waste was because after a storm. He goes, well, how are we supposed to control, like, the storm and all the storm drains and all this other stuff? And it's like, And Koch was like, well, we have a natural resource. Yeah, you do. You have a great natural resource. My best friend's husband goes fishing almost every weekend, going out of Marina Bay.
I had one of his striped bass that he caught.
Delicious, wasn't it?
Delicious. It was so good.
We saw whales. We saw seals. He saw a baby humpback. So things are thriving. And to hear that this is happening still after that huge cleanup on Boston Harbor, that Koch said that Quincy was on board and was dedicated to it. Well, you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. You know, it's not a priority for you, it seems. And if it was, if you're working at the pace that the EPA wants you to, you wouldn't be sued.
Right. Well, and the overall demeanor of Mayor Koch during the press conference was
he's a bully.
Very dismissive.
He's a bully anyway.
Yeah. He was like
he's
shitting
like, no.
all over the EPA.
He's like, no, they're out of their minds, basically, and we're doing everything possible.
They didn't tell us they were doing this, but then you saw hints through the press conference that
he knew it was
there
coming.
were a lot of delays, and that they had stopped communicating.
Yeah.
And he did know it was coming.
He was being pompous, too, and being like, well, I'm not going to do it. But I thought it was very interesting that Stephen Lynch was there, because even Koch was like, thanks for being here. Don't know why you're here, because
You know why?
Because it's an election.
Challengers.
He's facing 2 challengers, and that's why.
Yeah.
I thought the same thing.
I feel like he should have been a little bit more strategic, though.
Yeah, me too. It was just them two.
That was a terrible press conference.
It was just them two.
They are on the hook for what could be millions of dollars.
Yeah, what was the price a day?
So, according to the Clean Water Act, daily penalties of $37,500 for each violation that occurs before November 2nd of 2015. And after that, the violation jumps up to $54,833. So the EPA had said, we're doing this because we care about the environment.
10 years.
10 years is a long
I'm
time.
not saying that Quincy hasn't made some strides. Maybe they have. I don't know. I don't know how bad it was.
Well, yeah, they were making progress, but not fast enough.
Not fast enough.
Do you remember when Bill Weld jumped into the
Charles River? Yeah. Do you know Bill Weld now is like out of his mind? So was it a direct effect? You be the judge.
I remember that. I watched that clip and I was like, that is real dumb.
That's dumb.
I was a kid then too. I was like, that is dumb. Our podcast is very climate focused today, which I think is very appropriate because we are talking to 2 climate scientists in the interview.
And a lot of climate things have been coming up. The timing has been crazy for us. We're like, wow.
This worked out great.
Yeah, it did.
We are so forward thinking.
On the pulse.
On Friday, March 15th, hundreds of studies. That's very cute.
It was cute.
You should coin that.
You should.
Trademark. On Friday, March 15th, hundreds of students rallied in front of the Massachusetts State House as part of a global effort to demand more attention to climate change. Amazing.
Is it?
It is. So Massachusetts joined more than 100 countries around the world.
That's great.
I mean, they can coordinate. Okay, can we also talk about the coordination of that?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. That's amazing.
If we can coordinate a global... If teenagers can coordinate a rally in 100 countries...
Well, look at what the Parkland students did, too, you know? But can I just be a devil's advocate or whatever?
Oh, God. Go ahead, Denise.
I would leave school, too, whether or not I believed in the climate thing. I would like, oh, it's time to go? Okay.
Yeah, but you wouldn't go
Are we
to the
missing
State
the math
House?
exam? Sure, sign me up. I believe in the climate.
Yeah, but you wouldn't be at the State House then. You'd be, like, home.
No, I'd be on a field trip. I'd be like, are we going to get lunch after? Should we go and get some lunch? We're going to take the T, especially if I lived in the suburbs. This is an adventure for me. Screw school. And then across the world.
Denise, you really shit all over that for a minute.
I kind of did a little bit.
Yeah.
But I mean, think about it. I would like to believe that all of them that took the day off.
I'm going to call it, you're an asshole.
Walked out of the school was for the right reasons and not just for a day off.
Listen, there's always going to be somebody who does it for the wrong reasons. But you have to think about the majority of people who are doing it for all the right reasons.
Sure, you can think it's the majority.
You're such an asshole.
I'm not an asshole. I'm just a realist.
We're going to put Denise's Twitter handle in the show notes.
No,
Tell her how
I don't
you
want
feel.
any like hate tweets, but I mean, come on, like when we were kids and stuff too. I'm saying I was all about the climate because remember I told you I went to marine biology camp. I was concerned back then, but it was also a nice little distraction to get away from Boston.
Listen, I missed 35 days of school my senior year.
Why were you walking? Was this because of your back?
And I was shut up. And I was involved in a note writing scheme because I wrote like an adult. So I used to write.
You were in a scheme?
A scheme.
A note writing scheme?
Yes.
Is that like
I used
the
to
new
write
college
people's
admission scheme?
people's notes for missing school.
Oh,
Because I wrote in cursive. I'm like the only human on the planet that writes in script.
Oh my God. What were the benefits you reaped from that?
Money.
What kind of money? How much did you make?
It depended on the person I was working with. But then I spelled somebody's name wrong.
Oh God. That was it.
It just went downhill
That
from
was
there.
the end of it.
Closed up shop.
Well, you had to. Did you have to move to another school? Change your identity?
I stopped it all.
This is when your back started acting
That's
up.
when my back maybe
It had
was
to be
karma.
out. It could be. Anyway.
So listen, I get the missing school part, but can we just...
No, good for these kids.
Yeah.
Okay, good for them.
Thank you, Denise.
Because
That's what I needed you to hear.
Anything
That's what I
for you,
needed to
Laurie.
hear.
Anything for you. I mean, they're going to be the ones holding the bag on all of this craziness.
Yeah.
So, yeah, good for them for walking out, standing up. I mean, 100 countries?
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
So they were all the protests were aimed at demanding climate action from lawmakers.
Do you think they had a doodle poll?
No,
Be
I
like,
don't think teenagers.
hey, England, what day works for you? United States,
Who knows?
what day
Actually,
works for you?
who knows?
I love a good doodle
You're
poll.
so cynical right now.
I think I've had too much coffee. I'm not cynical, but how do you coordinate
how
something?
would you define this?
Well, my point of view.
Your cynical.
So
point
basically,
of
I'm
view?
an asshole every day.
Well, I did call you that twice already.
You did. That was kind of hurtful.
So, but here's why it matters. You'll hear it in the interview with Brian Helmuth later and Ashley Crine. The climate, the difference in climate between now and the Ice Age is 6 degrees.
And it's already raised 1 degree. So
Right.
we have 5 more degrees to go.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I think the millennials are our future.
Well, let's not.
Well, they literally are.
I mean, they are our future. I mean, whether or not we
but I
would
think
like
they're
it or
going to
not.
really start making some waves, especially in climate, because it matters to them.
Yeah.
It matters to all of us, but they're going to, these younger people are going to be bearing the brunt of it.
Yeah.
And then raising families or
not
whatever,
raising families because they're not going to be able to. Good news, Laurie.
What is it, Denise?
I'll tell you. Massachusetts again is in the news.
Why?
Because the House just passed the ban on conversion therapy.
Incredible.
It's about freaking time.
And the margin was even larger than last session.
Yeah, there was 14 members last session that voted against it. There were 8 members this year that voted against it. So now it's on to the Senate.
And it will absolutely pass in the Senate.
Karen Spilka already kind of signaled that it should be passed.
Right.
So hopefully.
And then off to the governor.
Off to the governor, and I don't think we've heard any indication that he would veto it.
Yeah. And let's give a shout out to Representative Kay Kahn.
Yeah, Kay
who was
Kahn.
the author of this bill.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
And also to Rep. Lewis, who gave a heartfelt floor speech in support of banning conversion therapy. And thanks to everybody who testified in front of the committee before it went to the House for the vote. That took a lot of strength and a lot of courage to tell your stories and to say why
Absolutely.
This should be banned.
All right, Denise.
All right, Laura.
So we're going to toss it off to this interview. Enjoy it.
Enjoy.
I'm so excited about this one.
Let's just give a little spoiler alert, can we?
It depends on what it is.
Muscles. That's all I have to say. Muscles.
You mean my muscles?
Not yours. Put them away. God, Laurie. Cheesy.
All right, off we go, Denise.
Off we go. Take it away.
Denise and I are here with Brian Helmuth and Ashley Crine at the Marine Science Center at Northeastern University. Full disclosure, I used to work at the university and I had the pleasure of working with a lot of people at the MSC, so I'm excited to be back.
It's great to have you back. We miss you.
Thanks. Thank you, Brian. I'll give you your $20 later.
I was just going to say, you paid him, didn't you?
I did. So let's dig in. What do you think?
I like it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So let's start with introductions. Ashley, do you want to
Sure.
introduce yourself first?
Yeah, happy to.
Okay.
So yeah, my name is Ashley. I'm a PhD student here at Northeastern in Brian Helmuth Lab. And I study the impacts of shoreline infrastructure on the ecology of intertidal systems, or the intertidal zone. And I'm primarily focusing here in Boston Harbor. I'm just interested in the ways that we as humans alter the coastline and create these accidental sort of ecosystems that haven't necessarily been designed and don't necessarily have analogs in nature.
Accidental.
What's an accidental ecosystem?
So that's kind of a term that I've been using lately to describe the ecosystem that has developed literally on top of the infrastructure that we've inserted at the shoreline edge. So The infrastructure is designed to retain coastal land area and prevent erosion, and it's not designed at all to support ecosystem functioning. And so there's an interesting body of research now that looks at ways of enhancing the physical properties of that infrastructure to support ecosystem functionality, and explicitly sort of reinforce habitat value or reinstall habitat value at the shoreline edge.
Wow. No big deal.
It's a lot
Yeah,
of
you know.
adaptation.
Yeah, very
These
cool.
things
Well,
just
thank you
adapt
for
really
joining
well.
us.
Okay,
I
sorry.
have a lot of questions for you.
We do.
Happy to be here.
Stay
All right.
tuned.
All right, and Brian?
And I'm Brian, I'm Ashley's advisor.
Oh.
Beyond that, I never quite know what I am. So I'm a professor in marine environmental sciences, but I also have a joint appointment in the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs. So kind of broadly, my lab does what we call ecological forecasting. We try to figure out where climate change is likely to have impacts, and then what do we do about it. But probably half of what we do is figure out how do we communicate that. How do we come up with tools that help people to make decisions and to help people see the consequences of the choices they make.
Wow. And you've had a lot of involvement in climate change initiatives, not just here in Massachusetts, but also nationally, right?
Yeah, we work nationally and internationally. So we're involved in what we call science diplomacy, where we're trying to work collaboratively with scientists across the planet, really, to figure out what clever solutions are they coming up with, how can we use those here, how can we take what we're doing here and apply it to places like China. At the national level, again, we work a lot with other scientists and policymakers across the U.S. Till recently, we worked a lot at the national government. Now we're working more and more at the local level and state level.
Shocker.
Yeah, I know. Wonder why.
Are we like the only country that's in deep denial of all of this, and or is there?
I think
Other
Australia
countries.
and Saudi
Australia
Arabia.
is?
Australia, yeah.
I'm surprised.
Yeah,
I am
well,
too.
it depends on whether you're talking about the people or the government, right?
Okay,
and
sure.
as I would argue, they are not necessarily the same.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in the Australian government, there's been a lot of denial about climate change as well.
Wow.
But yeah, we're pretty much the remaining holdouts at the federal level right now.
Wow.
It's kind of embarrassing when we travel
Yeah.
overseas.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and how far does that put us back when it comes in terms of not only discovery, but just being a part of the larger conversation?
Yeah, I'll let Ashley answer this too. For me, I think that's one of the roles that academia can play right now is that the U.S. government has basically ceded any leadership on this. And so the rest of the world is still going strong on finding solutions to climate change, but the discussions are happening at the subnational level, people like us. What do you think, Ash?
I totally agree. I think that it sets us back considerably to not have this be out in the open politically, or to just be able to frankly discuss it at the federal level.
Right.
And I think that one of the consequences of this administration is that, a lot of the impetus, I guess, for sort of bringing to light some of the major consequences of climate change has fallen below the federal level, and that can be a good and bad thing. It's certainly a motivation for myself. I'm glad to be a part of the resistance, I guess, in some ways.
The resistance.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth pointing out that when we say the federal level, it's not this monolithic thing. I mean,
Sure.
we tend to equate it with Trump's White House, but there are lots and lots of dedicated federal employees that are out there still fighting the good fight,
Right.
and
Right.
very strongly believe in this. And even though they are constrained in what they're able to say sometimes, they're still 100% committed to this.
Yeah.
And so how have you seen support change locally since we're seeing such drastic changes at the federal level?
Yeah, I think that's been the good thing is that as this vacuum's been created, to some extent it's being filled at the local and state level by corporations that are wanting to have public image that's reflective of what they see the stakeholders feeling, and so especially here in Massachusetts. I mean, I think Boston has been doing a pretty good job of preparing for this. They've done a really good job of connecting with other cities across the world. it's not a replacement for the federal government. To solve any of these things, there's going to have to be some level of cooperation and leadership. And
Right.
so to have the U.S. drop out of this is a huge issue, as Ashley was saying, just because other countries are going to be less likely to want to jump on board.
Mm-hmm.
But I think at this point, our best bet is to focus on the state and local level.
Yeah. So, just switching gears a little bit, the Marine Science Center does have a very unique location, and I know there's a lot of work that happens here because of that around megacities kind of moving more toward coastlines and how that move is really affecting ecosystems. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of your research in that space and how the Marine Science Center is helping kind of shed some light on what environmental impacts that these kind of moves are having?
And we're in New Nahant, Massachusetts,
Oh, yeah.
by the way.
Good point, Denise.
Thank you, Larry.
Thanks for clarifying.
We are here.
Yeah, like we can see the city line. We can see the
Yeah.
Boston skyline from here, which is cool.
We can, yeah. I mean, if we go down to the beach, you can see the Deer Island wastewater treatment plant. You can see Logan. You can see downtown Boston. And I think that's what brought me here about, how long have I been here? 6 years? Is this focus on urban resilience. And so if you look at most marine labs around the world, they're located in places that are what you consider pristine, except that there are no pristine places anymore. I mean, there are plastics everywhere. We're finding PCBs in polar bears, right? And so what I think is really exciting about Northeastern's Marine Science Center is that we're recognizing that we're part of this coupled human-natural system. And so if you're going to find solutions, it has to be taking that approach that we're not separate from nature. And so, we've got pretty clean waters out here. We can look at, quote unquote, natural systems, but it's only a short step to look at locations that are much more severely impacted in solutions too. Mm-hmm. And I think Ashley's work is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, I think, like Brian said, that's the same reason that I am here too, is because of this urban resilience priority that Northeastern has through the Marine Science Center and other programs. It's lucky for me to be in close proximity here at the lab to most of my field sites, which are in Boston Harbor, inner harbor areas like Chelsea Creek and Mystic River and Fort Point Channel. So being able to get between those heavily industrialized like urban sites and the Marine Lab in a day, like an easy 1 hour drive or so, is really awesome for me as a scientist.
Yeah. And so what are some of the things you've found through your research?
So one of the things that I'm doing now is a study looking at the community assemblage of organisms that live directly on the seawalls or the bulkheads in Boston Harbor, and what factors influence how those communities are formed. And so I am basically cataloging the species assemblage at different locations in the harbor, and trying to piece together what kind of environmental factors or like human mediated factors such as the infrastructure types themselves influence those influence the ecology of the intertidal zone in urban areas.
Yeah.
Wow.
How are the species differentiating themselves along those seawalls?
Well, you're gonna have to stay tuned because I'm still in the middle of organizing the data. Yeah, I'd love to come back. But yeah, I guess initially we're finding that it's a pretty simple ecosystem. There's only about 13 species that I've found in the growing directly on the walls in Boston Inner Harbor,
That
at least in my
like
12 sites.
a little number.
Yeah, it's
doesn't
pretty
it?
small.
Yeah.
I guess when you compare it to places like here, there's a more diverse, or there are more species here. The richness is higher here as compared to just, as Brian said, where you can just see in Boston, which is not too far away.
I think one of the really cool things about Ashley's work, though, is it recognizes that these are ecosystems. And while in a perfect world we would replace a lot of those hard structures with things like salt marshes or oyster beds, that's just not going to happen for a number of reasons. I mean, given the industry that happens, given the fact that there are other priorities like protecting shorelines from flooding, I think looking at how we can green the gray is a really smart way to think about this, and that's the way I see a lot of your research.
I like that, green the gray.
Yeah. So how do you see greening the gray in Boston? I'm just really curious. So when you have these 13 species that you're seeing grow on seawalls, does that mean that you're creating ways to help these 13 species survive and thrive, or is it another workaround?
I think that's a really interesting question for
That
us
is
as
an
a
interesting
society
question.
to start to address.
You're like Chris Wallace.
Except I'm not a fox.
No, you're not. You're not a fox.
Okay,
Sorry.
so basically, I think that that's a great question because it asks us to grapple with how we will design the shorelines of the future, which is where I'm hoping to participate later on from the science perspective. So I think from the data that I've collected so far, we can sort of form a baseline of species that we could support, and then it'll be up to us to decide how best to support them and whether we should, and in what kind of interventions are possible and advisable given today's environmental conditions and those of the future.
The flip side, though, is I think there is still a fair amount of natural habitat that's out there that we just don't recognize at all, right? And there are efforts underway to try to open that back up, to daylight it. And so, one example, we're working in a marsh in Revere. If you're driving down 1A and you look to the side, there's this huge marsh. Turns out that's a nursery for things like flounder. And the way it operates is it's open to the ocean. There's a series of gates that open and close. And during extreme high tides, they close to prevent flooding. Problem is they don't always work. They get jammed or people forget to close them. And so what often happens is they get closed all the time. So it's essentially a dam, which is great, prevents flooding, but then you get all this fresh water coming in, and an invasive species of grass called Phragmites comes in, which not only changes the ecosystem, but even worse, it dries out and catches fire. So now you're in a situation that if you're a homeowner living on that marsh,
Yeah.
you want your house to flood, or you want your house to burn down.
Right.
And so we're trying to come up with some ways of operating the gate that meets all those needs at the same time. So how do you maintain flushing enough that you can maintain those ecosystem services, you can maintain the nursery, but still prevent people's homes from flooding or from burning down. So so there are lots of ways to do this, but a lot of it requires that you recognize that we live in this ecosystem.
Right. Yeah, and I always think about not even just cities by the sea, but just like people living along the water. That's not something that's ever going to change, and it's just going to get more and more people are going to flock to the oceans. So how are you looking at balancing that, or even just starting to address some of the ecological concerns that come with this huge population starting to move toward the water?
Yeah.
What a great question.
It's a $1 million
We're sitting here looking at each other like, I don't have an answer. You want to answer that? Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, Boston is certainly having that conversation right now with the resilient Boston Harbor. It's an interesting predicament that as shorelines areas are becoming more and more risky, more and more people want to live there. And investment in like property is going up. This is just more
inundation
at risk. Exactly, here in Boston. So I think, the city of Boston has these two goals, which are to protect people, property, infrastructure at the coastline, and also to provide more public access to the coastline itself, or to the water itself. So those kind of two competing initiatives are probably the main parts of the conversation today.
Yeah, I mean, there are kind of three approaches, right? And this is one of the projects we work with the Museum of Science on is getting people to understand the consequences of these different options. I mean, it's either you just build the hell out of the coastline and you try to keep the water out. The worst example, which is making this giant wall around the outside of Boston Harbor, which will, I think, turn it into a sewer. You live with water. This is something that the Dutch are looking at. You, for example, create temporary areas to hold water during flood events. You create canals. You have surfaces that absorb the water, or you get the hell out of there and you move back. You can guess which one of those is the least popular. Nobody wants to abandon their seaside mansion and move away. Although after extreme events, after hurricanes, that is something that's being considered. I mean, if your house gets wiped out the third time by a hurricane, maybe it's time to move.
Third time's a charm for a lot of people.
But really, I mean, that's kind of the choice. But like Ashley's saying, I mean, people are flocking to the coast more and more.
It's crazy. But I know that Mayor Marty Walsh is really talking about like opening up the city to allow the water to just like kind of come in and us live with the water. And I think that's really brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, it's not brilliant. He didn't come up with it. But I mean, I think it's really kind of that forward thinking that the city kind of needs.
Yeah.
And a lot of other cities like New York is going to be facing the same thing. Like that's going to be a disaster when it goes up, the tide goes up a little bit more each and every year.
Well,
What's the average that it's going up now? The water level?
It varies so much depending on where you
are.
are. Yeah, I mean, there's some places that it's going like 9 inches in the last 50 years alone, and so it all depends on where you look.
Okay.
I always think ocean versus anything, the ocean is going to win.
Yeah,
I agree with you there.
Yeah, me too.
So, well, that brings us to the next point, talking about climate change. There's been a lot of discussion around climate change, and there's a lot of climate deniers out there, and they've definitely had quite the pedestal with this current administration. But I think in general, when we start talking about climate change, scientists need to be more a part of the discussion and a part of the solution. So how do you see where we currently are with the climate change and the need for more science, and where do you see us going in terms of being part of the conversation and really starting to address climate change and the issues around it?
Yeah, at some point, the deniers are in such deep denial that you're not going to pull them back out again.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got your head up your ass so far right now that you can't see that climate change is happening, nothing a scientist says is going to change that, right?
Right.
I mean, it is so freaking obvious that it's happening.
Yeah, did you see that? Was it a senator on the Senate floor holding a snowball?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is Senator Inhofe.
Yeah. He's like, I have a snowball in my hand.
So therefore, climate change is not real. Yeah.
Cool, really cool.
Stupid.
Yeah, and you know, if we want to try to be zen about it or something, I mean, it's partly to blame with scientists the way we talk about it, right? Because we talk about climate change as if it's the whole planet is uniformly heating up, and we talk about things like a 1.5 degree increase, which big deal, right? I mean, you think about 1.5 degrees, you just turn up your AC a little bit and you're fine, but that's climate. So the difference between now and the last ice age is a difference in climate of 6 degrees. So imagine a difference in magnitude going the other direction of 6 degrees.
Oh.
I mean, if we were under a mile of ice because of a 6-degree colder climate. And so the way we should be talking about this, and I think increasingly we are, is talking about the fact that why we care about this is that climate is changing weather events. And so, you know, it is increasing the severity of hurricanes. It is in some places creating drought, in other places extreme precipitation. It's just messing with weather. And there are always going to be people like Inhofe that are saying, oh, it is cold now, therefore climate change is not happening. And we as scientists can turn around and say, well, no, this makes perfect sense. We understand that it's just changing the jet stream, it's changing the way heat is moving around. But ultimately, I mean, I think by talking about solutions that not only address climate change, but many of the other issues that are facing society today, that's a way to kind of make some headway. What do you think?
I totally agree. I think that's a perfect description. I think the only thing I would add is that I don't see climate change as a political issue. I know that it has been like politicized. I was listening to a radio show a couple days ago, and they acknowledged that they were discussing climate change and whether it was happening or not. And they acknowledged that they were 3 non-scientists. So I think that we as scientists need to do a good job, and Brian's a great example of this, of reaching out and being present and available to include ourselves or insert ourselves in discussions. So that people have access to like facts or the state of scientific knowledge on this issue, and that we need to stop treating it like a debate that one side's going to win, because we're really all in this together.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that brings up the Green New Deal thing, talking about politicizing something that's affecting everybody. And now everyone's just like, no, we don't want the Green New Deal. How are you going to pay for it or whatever?
Right.
Missing the whole point of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. That we have to have that discussion. Yeah.
Right. Well, maybe we can go into the nuts and bolts of the Green Deal, but we were talking about this earlier about how it really sparks a necessary discussion. So what's your take on it?
I think it really comes down to what kind of world do we want to live in. And I agree with some of the criticisms that it's lacking in a lot of detail, and some of it is pie in the sky that it'd be really hard to achieve. But what I really like about it is the fact that it takes this kind of what we call a systems approach to thinking about things. that too often when we try to fix one little part of the system, we're inadvertently creating 10 more problems that we then have to go fix later. And so this is recognizing that all these things are interrelated. If you look at poverty, if you look at food security, if you look at climate change, look at gender inequality, all these things are all interrelated. And so taking a broad view, a big picture approach to this, I think is the only way we're going to solve it. And there could be many, many different answers to that depending on what kind of world you want to live in. But that's the discussion we have to have, not whether we should have the discussion.
Right.
Yeah, I guess at this point I see it as a framework,
Yeah.
like
That's a
a
great way to
social, ideological framework that needs to be filled in as our information gets more, gets clearer and more concise and is actionable.
To put it to ask a big question as simple as possible.
Oh.
So if you were to take climate change and how we should start tackling it, what are the 5 things you would want addressed first?
Man, you are Barbara Walters today.
Wow.
Like, I don't know what's going on with you. Was it that snack that you got before you
It might
came
have been
in?
a snack
I
had
think
before.
so.
Brain food.
Ooh, easy questions here today.
Right.
You got
Only
anything top
hard
of
hitting at
mind
political
here?
posse.
Well, we
Yeah.
can brainstorm 5 together, let's see.
All right.
Or we can do more than 5 too. I
Okay.
think wrapped up in the idea of climate change is like economic disparity.
Mhm.
So Boston's a good example of a place that's going to need to address that in a sincere way. So yeah, your question was, what are the 5 things about climate change or related to climate change you wanted to see addressed?
Right.
Okay.
All right, this is going to sound foofy, but I think, honest to God, what we have to do is unleash creativity to kind of break away from this idea that this is the way it's always been done,
Yeah.
and we can only make incremental change, and so this is the way we have to creep forward. I mean, there are so many examples of smart solutions around the world, so many solutions or ideas that break free, for example, of a reliance on fossil fuels, and recognizing that none of this is easy, but we get so mired in the minutiae that I think we forget to think big.
Yeah. That's what I think I like about the Green New Deal.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like everything in the kitchen sink, so let's see
Like,
what
start
kind of
from here.
sticks.
Yeah, yeah, and if you don't like it, come up with a better
Right.
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think to Brian's point, like installing these safe to fail approaches, right, for like especially in city management and city planning, and increasing adaptive capacity little by little, rather than like having to invest all that in one strategy.
Yeah, and we've done it before too. I mean, I know this is probably a tired analogy, but during the space race, right? The motivation was very different, and here the enemy or nemesis is climate change. But you know, this country could do these amazing things if we just get our shit together.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Tell us about Iraq.
So working in Iraq has changed the way I think about a lot of things. I've been working there since about 2012, and where I've been focusing is the southern marshes. And you know, we think of Iraq, we think of a desert, right?
Yeah.
Think of oil. Turns out there's this absolutely huge marsh that has supported a culture called the Marsh Arabs for the last probably 7,000 years. And these people are the descendants of the Sumerians. It's thought to be this is where the stories of the Garden of Eden and Noah's flood happened. Fortunately, what happened during the Gulf Wars is that Saddam Hussein took revenge on a lot of the Shia who were living in the marshes and built what's called the Mother of All Canals. So he drained the marshes into the desert and then set them on fire.
Oh my God.
So it's this horrific incidence of genocide through ecocide. I mean, this whole culture was entirely dependent on the marsh for their lifestyle. Their water buffalo ate the marshes. Their houses are built out of marshes. They literally build islands out of marsh reeds. And so you destroy the ecosystem and they're just gone. So now, in addition to outright killing a lot of these people, there's this big diaspora where they've moved into Iran and they've moved into what's called the Shah al-Arab along Basra. Fast forward a little bit, and climate change is happening as well, and it's so bad that there's now a big salt wedge that's moving up from the Arabian Gulf into the Shah al-Arab, and marine species are moving up into the marshes. So my role has been to collaborate with faculty from the University of Oxford to try to figure out what's happening to the ecosystem. Is there any way of trying to bring back any of the ecosystem services in the marshes? And as part of that, the Iraqi government has relied on them to help solve the water crisis that's going on right now, which is just this enormous problem. So it's in everything we're talking about here. I mean, that's probably the ultimate example of this society that has relied on its ecosystems and now is completely wiped out, and now we're doing the same thing in the rest of the planet.
Right.
And so the list of atrocities goes on, but it also shows just how much environmental change affects everything we do.
Yeah. We talk about this all the time. We talk about how everything is interconnected. It doesn't matter what policy you're talking about.
It's true.
Everything is interconnected. Transportation is connected to where you're living. Right? There's just so many different interconnections that I don't understand why people aren't thinking about it.
Right.
Or understanding it.
Yeah, and like you were saying before, like taking the siloed approach is never going to reap success because something else falls because of it.
I mean, all right, I won't get political here, but I mean,
you can do whatever you want.
Drives me freaking nuts about the idea of building walls. I mean, it's exactly the opposite of what we should be doing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to open up people's minds, if you want to get people to see those connections, it is building bridges, it's not building walls.
Yeah.
And so I just, to me,
Preach,
that's.
Brian.
I know. I'm preaching to the choir here. I know.
It's true.
But back to the 5 things that you could do with climate change. It's breaking down those goddamn walls. I mean, it's how do you build bridges between people from different cultures, different backgrounds? How do you take ideas that come from people who may have a very, very different view of the world, a very, very different life experiences, probably going to think of solutions you never would have thought of before.
Yeah.
And how do you harness all that?
Right.
Absolutely. And like to build on that, treating people as agents in finding solutions. I think we were just having a discussion before you guys came in that one of Brian's graduate students is working on projects for improving participatory research, like that whole process to make people feel empowered in addressing climate change in their local communities.
Is that the citizen scientists?
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
David Sittenfeld at the Museum of Science.
Yeah.
It does that. Yeah, I mean, I think this comes down to, we spent a lot of time talking about the importance of diversity from a justice and equity viewpoint, which is really, really important. But from a really self-serving viewpoint, diversity of all kinds is going to help us solve these problems. I mean, that's
Agreed.
from just a very pragmatic viewpoint, that if you limit the range of possible solutions and worldviews, you're screwed.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we can't just be so, what's that word? I don't know, self-absorbed to think that we as individuals have, like you and I, have all the answers.
Yeah.
Right.
Like I like to think I have all the answers, but I don't.
Well, you are right a lot.
Well, thank you, Laurie. Thanks for actually admitting that.
You have that on tape.
I kind of want to talk about your muscles and why the muscle. And put them away.
Yeah.
Put them away, Brian. This is a
I'm wearing
family
flannel,
show.
so yeah.
This is a family show. You guys are doing some extensive studies with the muscle and the temperature of the muscle and why the muscle. Do the muscle. Dun, 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 dun.
Oh my God, Denise.
Is that dating
You have
me?
to break out like one cheesy thing
Yeah,
during
I
each
know.
interview.
I'm sorry.
I don't know how to follow that.
You can't.
How do you follow
You
that? Yeah, I mean, really nobody cares about muscles, right? I mean,
They're delicious.
They're
Yeah.
delicious. Well, exactly.
Exactly.
So in many parts of the world, economically, they have this huge impact. So we work a lot in China, where mussels are a major industry. Europe, same thing. And we do some work with aquaculture. But the other reason is that they're like the trees of the intertidal zone. I mean, they're we call foundation species or structuring species. If you get rid of mussel beds, you're getting rid of a whole bunch of other organisms. There are fish that eat them and things that live in them, and so I mean, we spend a lot of time trying to think like a snail, right? That it's like if you imagine a rock that may be I don't know, a couple feet high. That's Mount Everest to some little critter that's out there.
Right.
And so, same thing. If you're in a mussel bed, that's a whole new world. And and so they're really important for diversity of and functioning of coastal systems.
So what sparked you to do this? Because I think you need to talk a little bit of it more, because you actually built a robotic mussel to collect data.
Doesn't everybody? No.
I haven't yet.
We can help you do that.
Can we have it as like a parting gift?
Sure. Definitely good idea.
It's better than
it's like the new nanny cam.
It is the new nanny cam.
I mean, so I don't think anybody really sets out to be a climate scientist. I mean, it's just depressing, right? And you get hate mail, and I have colleagues that get death threats, right?
Oh my
so,
God.
Yeah. I mean, so why would
God
you?
God forbid you try to save the world.
How
dare you?
Literally.
How dare you? Let it die.
But I became one because everything I was studying kept dying.
Yeah.
And so, I'd study coral reefs, and you'd find these beautiful coral reefs. You come back a couple months later, it's just gone. It's just like a bunch of confused fish swimming around in this dead coral, and then it's exactly. And then a couple months later, it's a parking lot.
Right.
And so we started seeing mussels dying. This is back when I was in graduate school, and the only thing we could think of is that they were getting too hot out there. But the problem is, based on what we know of mussel physiology, they shouldn't have been dying. The air temperature wasn't anywhere near close enough to killing them, so something else was going on. And then it's one of these aha moments that you realize that probably should have thought of a long time before, and probably somebody has thought of before. Mm-hmm. It's like their temperatures are not driven by air temperature. It's driven by air temperature with the sun. So you go outside on a hot day and you put your hand in a parking lot, it's going to be a lot warmer than the air, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the surface is heating the air. Same thing's happening with not just mussels, but all these plants and animals out there. We could go outside with an infrared camera, even on a cold day like today, and you see that the temperature of some of the trees out there are quite a bit warmer than air. And so we had to come up with some way of measuring not the temperature of the surroundings, but the temperature that the animals experience.
I see.
And that's how we did it. We built these robo-mussels.
That's awesome.
What have you found so far using these robo-mussels?
So if you look at the world from the viewpoint of a mussel, it's a very dangerous place.
Yeah.
So you find that even though air temperatures are not as warm as you would expect to kill them, in a lot of places they're a lot closer to death because they're being heated up by the sun and then losing heat to air. So increases in air temperature really matter. It raises kind of the base, and then the sun warms them above that. And so it explains why we're seeing them dying. But the other interesting thing is that the very local conditions have a huge influence on how hot they're getting. And so rather than things getting warmer as you move towards the equator and colder as you move towards the poles, we're seeing what we call mosaics, where you move up the coastline, it gets hot, it gets cold, it gets hot, it gets cold. So places in Central Oregon, for example, are getting warmer than animals in Southern California, all because of these very local conditions. So it kind of turns on its head this idea that we could just take a human view of climate change. If we care about our food sources, and we care about these ecosystem services, you kind of have to look at the world like a snail.
Yeah.
Oh, be a snail.
That's interesting, though.
Are mussels close to being
sense.
extinct, or is there a really major threat against mussels?
Yeah, so we've been seeing a lot disappear in the Gulf of Maine. When I was here, I did my master's degree here in the late 80s, early 90s, and there were enormous mussel beds carpeting everything out here. Now they're pretty much gone.
Oh, wow.
And we've got a couple here that we're still studying, but they're really retreating throughout the southern Gulf of Maine.
This is people's livelihood, too.
Yeah. See, everything's connected.
Everything is connected. Ashley, tell us one good thing that's happening
in the world
through the environment and climate, like that you feel hopeful about.
Well, I guess from my perspective, thinking about like shoreline design, I think there's a lot of really heartening collaborations now between the landscape architecture community and the city planning agencies and ecologists. So, I mean, here at Northeastern, I've been fortunate enough to be a part of mostly the landscape architects, and here at the Marine Science Center in a community of ecologists. But I think that we were talking about earlier how the siloed approach doesn't really work. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of reason to be hopeful that this new sort of style of collaboration will produce super interesting creative results in terms of adaptation policy. So I'm like an optimist in general, and so
You
I
and
would
Lori.
be about shoreline
That's
design.
great.
The prospects for shoreline design.
That's good. I think. Do you feel like there's this I don't know, surge and maybe this revolution like you were talking about, that hey, if the government's not going to do it, then we need to start doing it. And just because the government's not doing that doesn't mean that we just stop and then don't address it. Do you feel like that's kind of like a swelling that's happening?
Yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of time trying to find some silver lining after Trump got elected, to tell my daughters, and it's kind of all we could come up with is maybe just shocking people out of complacency that you're not going to rely on your government to do the right thing, that you have to find other pathways. And honestly, what gives me the most hope is that young people are getting pissed off.
Yeah.
And they're realizing that they're going to pay the price for climate change.
Right.
And that they're
the
acting
most.
on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been really great.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
probably end up
Yeah.
like you find us like squatting here every once in a while.
Yeah, roaming the shores.
Come back
always
anytime.
welcome.
And little
Thank
clam
you.
diggers.
Yeah. So before we leave, though, let's talk websites. Where can people learn more about the research that you guys are doing? Francis has some cool videos.
Yeah,
online
we didn't even
that
talk
people
about all
should check
the
out.
virtual
Yeah.
reality stuff we've got online.
Yeah, let's talk about that just for a minute because it's really cool.
Yeah,
And I think
sure.
it'll
I like
help.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the stuff's posted on our website. It's northeastern.edu/Helmuth Lab, HELMUTHLAB, and it's all there.
Excellent.
So,
And what kind of videos are they?
so we didn't even talk about this, but we have a bunch of 360 virtual reality creations, some of which we've created with school kids from around the world, where they are showcasing some of the things they've done in the field. We've got groups here in Lynn communicating with a group in Israel and another one in Paris. This summer we're working on getting another group in China. And what they show are these environments from around the world. And so if you want to look at them you can look at it online on an iPad or on a Oculus Rift. They're all downloadable and free on our website.
Excellent.
I might add too, just to plug Chelsea Creek a little
Yes.
bit. That,
Yes.
a couple of years ago, we got a camera on loan from Google. It's the same one that they use to make Google Street View, and we took it up and down the whole length of Chelsea Creek, and created these photospheres. So I'm calling it Chelsea Creek View now, and it's published and available on Google Maps anywhere. So you can take your little guy and drag him over Chelsea Creek and
That's
see what it
kind
looks
of
like.
cool.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
where is Chelsea Creek? I don't want to assume it's in Chelsea, but is it in Chelsea?
It is. It borders so the city of Chelsea and the neighborhood of East Boston. So you're right on.
Thank you.
And it's super. One of the reasons that we did it in the first place was because the current configuration of the banks is almost 100% of it is in this designated port area. So it's super dominated by commercial industrial activities. People are now calling, like residents of Chelsea and East Boston are calling for more public access. But in the meantime, we wanted to provide this like virtual port of access down the creek, just to give that perspective from the water.
Yeah,
So,
Cool.
yeah, so I encourage people to check it out.
I'm going to check it out.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Show
too,
notes.
for our podcast.
Welcome back.
Welcome back, Denise.
I felt very journalistic. Welcome back, and we're back.
And we're back.
And we're back. Hope everyone enjoyed it.
I love those guys.
They're just so warm.
Yeah. So they took us on a little tour of their lab too afterwards.
And we saw the mechanical muscles.
Yeah. So we'll post a picture
I like it.
and show what they look like. They look just like muscles.
Yeah, and they were showing us this interactive scenarios of things too that is being rolled out to the Museum of Science, where there could be interaction with children, and they've been doing it for small companies and educational facilities, and hopefully their aim is to teach legislators what it will look like if no action is taken for certain scenarios. So lots of
Knowledge
stuff.
is power.
Lots of stuff coming out of that facility. So you ready for political pill, Lori?
Let's hear it, Denise. I'm looking forward to this one.
Are you?
Yes, I said I was.
Are you just like pandering to me?
I don't pander to you, Denise.
The
You
Trump.
can see right through me.
Well, not with my readers.
That is true.
You're blurry. Again, the Trump administration is, in my opinion, isolating the United States from the rest of the world in another act of, I feel, defiance. The administration is preparing to shutter all international offices of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, also known as the USCIS. It's a move that could slow the processing of family visa applications, foreign adoptions, and citizenship petitions from members of the military stationed abroad.
Oh, God.
This is from the Washington Post. It was published on March 12th, so it's relatively new.
Right.
So the director, who is L. Francis Cisna, wrote an email to the employees saying that some of these duties are going to be transferred from employees worldwide to domestic offices and State Department embassies and consulates. So he says, and I quote, "I believe by doing so, we will better leverage our funds to address backlogs in the United States while also leveraging existing Department of State resources at Post." And he goes on to say, change can be difficult, blah, blah, blah,
God.
all this other stuff.
Come on.
I mean, sure, if that's what you want to believe, that
Spin it any way you want.
you can spin it any way, saying like backlog of services. Well, half of our embassies embassy positions aren't even filled yet.
Right.
I read number one. Number two, you know who this is impacting, Laurie?
Tell me, Denise.
The shift will ripple to offices in New Delhi, Port-au-Prince in Haiti, Rome, and numerous other foreign cities where the agency has offices that handles emergencies. So there's more than 20 offices, including several in Mexico. Surprise, surprise.
Shocker.
2 in China, and 1 that was set to open in Ethiopia. So they're saying that they're going to save millions of dollars each year by phasing out this international offices. But of course, immigrant advocates are worried. It's just another effort to discourage foreigners from attempting to come to the United States. And experts say closing the offices will shrink the nation's engagement with the rest of the world.
Oh my gosh.
That's my biggest concern. We are isolating ourselves, and our allies are not going to be really happy with us.
Well, we aren't isolating ourselves. We are pushing
We are
to not
positioning,
do that, but
Yeah.
the Trump administration is working to isolate us for
saving
sure.
millions so we can funnel those resources someplace else.
To
Where
a
do you
wall?
think? Well, yeah, Laurie, where do you think? Of course it's the wall. Hey, here's some funding we can do if we get rid of these offices and that offices. What happened to... So that's where we are right now. So this hurts for adoptions too. I mean, advocates for families attempting to adopt say the immigration agency added expertise in a collaborative approach that did not always find in the consular corps.
Right.
So I don't know. So they're basically saying this agency was better than some of the consulates and embassies dealings.
How is
Yeah.
this helping us?
I don't know.
Where's the benefit in this for us? I mean, saving millions of dollars. And when you talk about it in the grand scheme of things,
Yep.
millions of dollars when you're looking at the federal government is like a drop in the bucket.
Right.
So I'm calling out the bullshit.
I'm calling out the bullshit too. They're saying it's, of course, the cost saving measure that you were just talking about, and they're saying that they're shifting the responsibility to the State Department, and,
Which has been decimated.
yeah, which they feel would be better able to handle it. They're calling it like streamlining, that it belongs there anyway, and it shouldn't have this other separate arm.
I disagree.
Yeah, I don't know. They haven't said, Laurie, about a time frame, but just another indication that, like, okay, we're going to implement something and not care about the ramifications, like we talked about last week with his, executive order to speed up the facial recognition and stuff.
Right.
I mean, this is all stuff that is just knee-jerk reaction to fitting into his master scheme.
This is why I like that you do this section, because these are things that aren't headline grabbers per se. However, they are wildly impactful, and Denise has more of this and more details on this story in our blog Political Pill on our website politicalposse.com, so you can read more about it there.
Yeah,
as
we'll
well.
link to the article too.
And in previous episodes you've talked about some other things that are a little bit more obscure but have large impacts. So there's a lot to keep there is so much to stay on top of.
I don't know. Wait till next week.
When something else happens.
Yeah, I mean, this is a blip on the screen, right? It makes headline news one day, and then everyone forgets about it.
Right. Well, because there's so much to stay. There's so much between in this administration alone. all the legal stuff that's happening, all the Manafort, all the Cohen, all the people being indicted and being brought in. It's hard to navigate it all, and then it's also hard to navigate it all and stay a sane person.
Sometimes I have to take a break.
I do too.
It's just too much.
Yeah.
It's too much. We asked Brian Helmuth that too because I was worried about his just his self-care because he's in the environmental climate change every day and the impacts of it, and he sees it directly. And it's a weight. And you have that burden and you're doing the best that you can. And I bet sometimes he feels that it's just a drop in a bigger bucket.
Right.
But Brian, if you're listening, keep on doing the big fight, my friend.
That's
because
right.
you're making a difference, and you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah. We'll all go and get pedicures.
Yeah, or a massage.
Facial.
Not a massage though from the Daily Spa.
No.
We'll
Because
cut
that would be
out, too.
weird.
That would be very weird.
So
Well,
we're not
Lori,
going to Florida.
I think that's it. Is there anything else you would like to discuss or talk about before we say goodbye to everybody till
No,
next week?
I think we covered a lot today.
I think we did too.
Yeah. So, but we have we're doing some cool stuff too with Political Posse. So stay tuned. I think we should plug our website, Denise.
politicalposse.com, all one word. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Subscribe to our podcast, please. That would be lovely. Write a review, like we say every
Only
week.
good ones though.
Like we say every week, only good ones.
Yeah, just reminding everybody.
Yes, please. For the love of God.
Yeah, and let us know what you think.
Yeah, and even send us some feedback too. I mean, we would like to hear from you.
Only if it's good though.
Again, only if it's good.
And tells me that I'm better than Denise.
No, those are not. No, those will be tossed.
All right. So until next week.
Until next week, Laurie.
All right.